Hello, everyone, and welcome to the American Cheese Society's continuing webinar series. I'm Heather Tucker, our program coordinator and head of education here at ACS. Before we get started, I wanted to say thank you to our presenting sponsor, Dairy Connection. With their generosity, we're able to offer this webinar to members and non-members alike of ACS. As always, if you are unable to watch us live, this webinar will be recorded and shared online later. As one of the LGBTQ community, this is super important, and I'm super excited to actually be able to share this session. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our speakers and panelists this session. Our session today is the LGBrieTQ Cheese Industry Guide to Inclusivity of the LGBTQ+ community. Our presenters today are Eris, Schack, Caitlin O'Neill, Lilith Spencer, and Nick Bayne. Our session today will be an in-depth panel discussion looking at the history and future of the LGBTQ+ person's relationship and contribution to the greater cheese industry. Each diverse panel member also represents a different facet of the LGBTQ+ community, who can individually draw from their own personal experiences as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or queer person in the world of cheese. This presentation serves as the beginning of a conversation which uncovers topics long ignored in our industry. And without further ado, take it away, guys. Thank you so much.
Hello, American Cheese Society members. Welcome to our non-members who are joining us here today. And a special thank you to Dairy Connection for allowing us all to have this space free of charge and open to both members and non-members combined. A huge thank you as well to all of our LGBTQ+ elders within this community who have paved the way for us to be able to have this discussion here today at ACS. We appreciate you and your willingness to be so open with yourselves at a time when it was even more unsafe and dangerous to do so. And we thank you immensely for everything you have done to enable us to have this space here today. So with that said, today's panel is LGBrieTQ, a guide to LGBTQ+ inclusion in the cheese industry. My name is Caitlin O'Neill, and I'm the moderator for today. And I am joined with three fellow panelists that you can see before you. Now, before I introduce myself or the rest of them a little bit further, I want to give you an idea of what our mission here together is today. So today we will be sharing stories of LGBTQ+ experience within the cheese community. We've solicited these from a Facebook group that we are all members of and some moderators of as well, called LGBrieTQ, hence the name of our panel. And these testimonials have been solicited anonymously with the idea of giving this space to our fellows in the community to be heard, regardless of their affiliation, regardless of who they are or where they work within the industry, to be given this opportunity to hear their voices and to take action as a result. So our first part of the panel will focus on testimonials. The next will be a set of roundtable questions that are aimed to our panelists here, reflecting on the testimonials that we heard. And the last section of our presentation will be a call to action, because ever more so in today's times, it is exceptionally important, if not vital, that we all act with as much accordance as we speak to our troubles and speak to the issues that we see. So there'll be a call to action at the end of this presentation as well. But first, before you get to know any more of our presentation, you should get to know us a little bit. So like I said, my name is Caitlin O'Neill. I'm the head of retail and food service at Cowgirl Creamery, a proud employee there of what is a legacy lesbian-owned and founded brand, which now has many LGBTQ+ employees and fantastic representation within that. My career in cheese has spanned about 10 years, and I've worked for small, medium, large, and nationwide companies. Before working for Cowgirl Creamery, I worked for Murray's Cheese for a number of years in education and training, and was lucky to teach cheese and cheese pedagogy and the art of selling cheese nationwide through about 28 states. So I'm excited to bring that passion for our national mongering and selling community here to today's panel. And with that, I would love to introduce our next panelist, Schack.
Hey, Caitlin. So my name's Eris Schack. For those of you who don't know me, I've been working in cheese retail since around 2007. I got my first job in Chicago, Illinois. I've worked both where I live now in Brooklyn, New York, as well as throughout Chicago, at a number of different counters, large and small. And I've had the privilege of being able to meet a lot of my mentors and kind of learn from the old guard, as well as help participate in the building of a lot of the new fun counters out there too. With that in mind, I think one of my proudest points at this venture is I am now a highly visible trans lesbian in the cheese community, having come out just about a year ago now. And that in its own self, I feel is probably one of my greatest accomplishments, because it is hard coming out so late in life. I also have done a lot of work myself within the advocacy, doing volunteer work for both sex workers advocacy and also the trans community and LGBTQ community as a whole. I put a lot of my heart into that work and look forward to looking into that work a lot more with the cheese community itself, which I am currently kind of a free agent and might be stepping away from the counter a bit and a little bit more into a role involving advocacy. But enough about me. I would like to pass this torch on now to Lilith Spencer.
Hi, I'm Lilith Spencer. I identify as bi and non-binary, and just recently started using they, them pronouns for anyone out there who knows me and doesn't know that about me yet. I'm currently the lifestyle editor for Jasper Hill Farm, which means that I execute all of our newsletters, I handle our photography, I help with recipe development, a little bit of social media, designing gift boxes, and other fun creative work for the company. Before this, I worked as a cheesemonger for about 8 years in Massachusetts, and then Brooklyn, New York at Brooklyn Larder, and then Santa Fe, New Mexico at Cheesemongers of Santa Fe. And next we have Nick Bayne.
Hi, so I'm Nick Bayne. I'm the head cheesemonger at the Fine Cheese Company's original shop here in Bath in the United Kingdom. As you can tell from my accent, I am not British at all, but I've been cheesemongering on and off since 2008 and consecutively since 2013 in the US, primarily in New York. Some of you might also know me as one of the CMI champions, just like Lilith and Eris here, back in 2015 for myself. Some of you might know me from my Instagram, The Cheese Mason, and others of you might not know me at all, which is wonderful. Nice to meet you all. I identify as omnisexual, which is quite similar to pansexual, if you haven't heard the term yet, and use he, him pronouns. And a couple of years ago, I started this little Facebook group called LGBrieTQ. This was caused by the impetus of a lot of really, really horrific actions and words from the current administration in the United States government, and a realization that those of us who are LGBTQ+ in the dairy and cheese community had no centralized system of communicating with one another. We knew of one another to some degree. We usually knew one or two other people who are LGBTQ+, or if we're lucky, a lot more, but had no singular way of being together and being part of a community and having a way to interact with each other in a centralized way. So on the back of that, LGBTQ was formed, started with about 40 people, and we have blossomed to over 100 at this point, which is absolutely wonderful. And so here in this talk, we represent them as well as other members of the LGBTQ plus community, and of course, ourselves.
So myself, Eris, Lilith, and Nick are but 4 members of LGBTQ, and we've solicited testimonials from other members of this Facebook group. We recognize that this is just a small faction of our community, but we hope by bringing these stories to light, we give an opportunity for these to be heard, to be discussed upon, and for the issues that are brought up that are more universal in nature to be addressed by our greater community. So it's important for us to note too that throughout today's discussion, we'll be using some terminology that might differ in its reaction, especially between generations of our community. So we want to acknowledge that. We also want to give people space to speak authentically to how they identify and the words that they use accordingly. So in today's testimonials, we will be using the words as written by the folks who have given our testimonials. That does include words referring to our community of all types. So we do want to give that warning to folks too, that this wording will be authentic with the need for authenticity and impact in folks being heard today. So it is important for us to hear folks in these words. And with that said, I'm going to pass this off to Lilith, who will read our first testimonial.
After working through all facets of the service industry, nothing quite felt like working in cheese. I can remember leaving kitchens and retail to train as a cheesemonger, and my girlfriend at the time, who was a working chef in San Francisco, laughed and said, "You're kidding, a cheesemonger? That's so perfect." And I said, "Why? What do you mean? Is that a thing?" I didn't know that working in cheese could be considered a default career move for a queer in the food industry. It's been an incredible experience working in cheese as a queer woman. It's by far the most open and gender diverse work environment I've been a part of. Truly the opposite of most cis and testosterone-driven kitchens. And I think that diversity has lent itself to a more progressive workplace. More tender, can I say that? Communication lines between employers and employees feel more open, policy is more transparent, conversations around mental health are not taboo. I do feel that queer workers had those priorities first, long before they became the norm in straight workplaces. However, I can't say that attitude extends beyond retail environments. I've absolutely experienced pressure, pushback, and microaggressions in the corporate wine and cheese world, the places that feel like the old boys club. One could get really deep here on why I felt like it was unacceptable, but I've had both employers and wholesale customers who didn't treat me fairly. There were times I was openly denied opportunities and spoken to condescendingly. I have been told very plainly that I couldn't handle certain accounts because I was a woman, or rather, given certain customers that had a history of being misogynistic very specifically because I was a woman. Awful. I realize now I wasn't given the proper mentorship or tools to fight that kind of treatment, but of course it becomes so much more complicated when that kind of discrimination is coming from within your own workplace. The last thing I'll say is, why haven't the gays organized around CMI and Fancy Food Show and Pride? I hate that every year I have to choose between cheese parties and pride parties. Why can't we have both? We should have both.
When I started in cheese, I did not have a cheese background. I had a grocery store background. I started at a grocery store when I was 15 years old pushing carts. When I was 16, I became a cashier. From the cashier position, I went into bookkeeping when I was 16, 17 still. Then I moved to running the front end, then home delivery dispatcher. I saw an opportunity when I saw a posting for cheese steward position. I went for it, and without having any knowledge, I began running a cheese shop. I had no idea what I was doing, and I had taken the place of a lady who had been there for years. Everyone wanted me to fail. especially my deli manager. It became clear to me that he hated me, and it wasn't until later it became more clear that he mainly hated me for my sexual orientation. He would say I was a pansy and should work faster. He said things like flaunt away or make rude gestures with his body, implying I was feminine. My schedules got worse. He would change them at the last minute, and worst possible shifts, night shifts till midnight. Finally, it got to the point where he straight out called me a fag. I was so upset, but never defeated. This pushed me to work harder, to learn more, and to be the best damn cheesemonger I could be. One day, I worked up the courage to tell my division cheese specialist what was happening. She was enraged with the deli manager and went to the district manager. The district manager then moved him to a different store. Later, he dug his own grave and was fired. From there, I was able to be myself with the next deli manager. He didn't care as long as I worked hard. After all of that, 9 years later, here I am overseeing half the country in specialty cheese. I won't be defeated by others. I will always build up those around me. I will always look out for anyone who works hard or has interest in cheese or food. No part of a human matters but their heart and intentions. I now know that, and I am a better person for it.
When we opened our business over 15 years ago, we came from a Fortune 100 world that, on paper and policy, was very accepting of the LGBTQ+ community, and HRC would award them 100 points for having all their proverbial ducks in a row. Reality and what's on paper can be quite different, though, as patriarchal culture is much slower to change, and subtle but real forces can still very much inhibit one's success in some of these lauded behemoths. So upon shifting to the world of cheese, we were somewhat concerned going into an agriculturally rooted industry, and where the true underlying culture would fall for two guys opening a pop and pop shop, as one journalist referred to us, focusing on smaller production cheese. We were pleasantly surprised at how evolved the cheese industry of the early 2000s was with regard to what would now be called the queer community. In this aspect of diversity, the American cheese industry was already amply populated with visible, successful, and welcoming people from the LGBTQ+ community. Makers, mongers, farmers, business owners, cheese company execs, and yes, even leaders of the American Cheese Society. In fact, some of the rising stars that are now iconic figures in cheese were and are from our community. The willingness to assist, collaborate, and go the extra mile to help everyone was astounding. On reflection, we realized that a contributing factor to this enlightened environment that was slightly ahead of its time was the large presence and leadership of women, where the representation was far larger than in the corporate world we left. Women helped forge and build the specialty and artisan cheese industry in America, and their sensibility and commitment to inclusion was, and still is, a driving force in the quest for diversity in the industry. We are not where we want to be, or even close in all aspects of diversity, but I have hope that we will get there because of the cheese community's collective moral compass.
For much of my time in the industry, I've been lucky. I'm cis male, not particularly effeminate, worked in progressive or liberal cities, and have achieved enough in the industry that I don't have to defend myself as often as I used to. But I still have felt deeply uncomfortable and even unsafe to be openly queer in numerous positions. My first job in New York was at a longstanding institution full of managers and supervisors who were steeped in the culture of bigotry, misogyny, and abusive behavior that runs deep in the culinary industry. My supervisor in charcuterie ogled and talked about every young woman who came by our counter like she was a fresh piece of meat, even though his wife worked in the same building. And when he found out I wasn't straight, he told me, "Look, I don't really give a shit, but don't you hit on me or I'll kick your ass." My first real mentor in cheese was the older monger at the same business who sexually harassed me daily with her breasts and tales of her husband's sexual prowess. And when she found out that I wasn't straight, asked me, "Wait, so you're a faggot?" Every time she and I had a disagreement from that point onward, this word came up. At the time, I humored it. I genuinely liked her otherwise, and she was a deeply experienced cheesemonger who was teaching me the ropes. My next stop after this was a business partially LGBTQ plus owned, and my next couple of jobs after that were some of the most LGBTQ plus friendly and specifically trans friendly environments I have ever encountered. Moving from that first New York job at a dinosaur to these new, hip, progressive employers was the most crisp and refreshing breath of fresh air, no matter what else may have been occurring in my life. And yet, many older male members of the cheese community immediately begin hitting on me once my sexual orientation comes to light. When all I want is camaraderie, all I receive are a host of flirtations. When these advances come from more powerful or influential members of the industry than myself, I find it incredibly difficult and anxiety-inducing to turn them down. Now, I work in a location where I once again must hide myself. While there is no problem whatsoever with being queer where I work, and uniforms are non-gendered, I'm currently in a situation where I cannot be my true self for reasons both legal and cultural. Not only am I queer, but I am in a polyamorous marriage, and if the government of where I live found out that I am not monogamous, I could lose my residency. I have still found ways to be open with my generally liberal and accepting coworkers, but it has been made difficult at times. Once, one of my colleagues was talking about contacting a man on Tinder who divulged off the bat that he is in an open marriage. My colleague referred to this man as disgusting and a perv because he was honest with her about this. It took me a solid 6 months at least to reveal myself to her as both queer and poly. Comparatively, I have been luckier than others, but it can still be hell.
Being bi means that when I'm in what appears to be a heteronormative relationship, most people forget that I'm queer. Being assigned female as birth, non-binary, means that people assume I'm a woman based on my appearance. In tandem, this means that when I'm dating a man, most people assume that I'm a straight woman, which is wholly inaccurate. I've felt for a long time that I identify as neither male nor female, but I've spent much of my time attempting to assimilate into society's standards of femininity against my own wishes. As I began to gain confidence and present more authentically, which for me means more ambiguously, I'm hopeful that my non-binary identity will be taken more seriously, that my pronouns seem less arbitrary, but it shouldn't have to be that way. I should be able to expect that my correct pronouns will be used and that my queerness will be taken seriously, whether or not it looks queer to someone else. I've been fighting for visibility for so long, and I am so tired. I'm lucky to have found an incredible LGBTQ subculture within the mongering community and have received a lot of love and support from this incredibly passionate circle of friends and colleagues. But I was disappointed to find that this level of acceptance is not nearly as present on the production side of the cheese industry. Part of this, I think, is due to the fact that most cheese production happens rurally, where gender norms tend to be more tightly clung to, heteronormativity is more celebrated, and toxic masculinity is much more present and prevalent. The often subtle, yet ever-present toxic masculinity and implied preference for heteronormativity I experienced in the production space made me wary of coming out as bi at work. And I simply surrendered to the idea that it left little to no room for my non-binary identity. I did eventually open up about my sexuality, and predictably, I was faced with a lot of ignorant and inappropriate questions. This only reinforced the notion that I probably shouldn't rock the boat further and bring my gender identity into it. I transitioned out of production for unrelated reasons, but I'm honestly relieved that I no longer have to deal with the daily lighthearted jokes that reek of sexism and homophobia. And that distance has made me feel more comfortable owning both my sexuality and gender identity. but fearing that my truth is most likely casually mocked and joked about behind closed doors is incredibly discouraging. I'm hopeful that progress can be made, but I am so very exhausted from constantly instigating this process and wish that more of my non-queer coworkers would activate their allyship in meaningful ways. I'm seeing positive change in many parts of the cheese industry in regards to inclusivity, but I wonder when cheese production will be a truly safe space for queer individuals, and how we can make that change happen when it is still so broadly ruled by patriarchal expectations.
Okay, so here's the good, the bad, the ugly. First, the good. My first day at the cheese distributor I now work at, I was nervous as hell. Not only would it come out that I was gay and married to a woman when I filled out all the forms, but also in the interviews, I never mentioned that I was pregnant. So double whammy, first day. At the end of the day, we were filling out more forms and I started to sweat. I got nervous. So I told my boss, not only was I pregnant, but gay as well, apologizing for not saying it sooner. My amazing boss stood up and said, "Oh my God, congratulations!" and gave me a big hug. That is something you never really see. It never happens when you come out in a work setting. She said that everyone is going to be very supportive and I wouldn't have to worry about being gay while working here. It's really great to be open and talk about your family, not have it affect your work performance or the way people perceive you. Now the bad. At my last job, I was being offered a position that I didn't really want or apply for, but it was offered to me anyways. I was kind of on the fence about it, and my male straight manager wanted to have me make a decision right then and there. I said I had to think it over, talk it over with my wife, to which he responded, "Well, what do you need to talk about? You can just talk about it with me. You have no kids or family. Just make a decision." As if my wife was nothing. We don't make decisions, we make decisions together as a family or have responsibilities at home. Yes, we didn't have a child at the time, but we still had responsibilities to each other, and my workload and schedule would change if I took that position. The next day, my manager was still mad that I had not talked it over with him. Ultimately, I turned it down. Finally, the ugly. I was working as a chef in New York City at an upscale restaurant. I remember the image. One of the male chefs would yell out to another male chef as they put their hands up and gave a high five, laughing as they said, "Hey man, what do you say that we go downtown tonight and slap around some gays?" I went to the sous chef in HR and nothing was done, just a talking to. The one chef who said it apologized, but it was only because he got caught. His excuse, "You didn't look gay. I never would have said it in front of you if I knew you were."
I've been a cheesemonger for 20 years. I'm bi and non-binary, but unless I tell people, they probably don't know. I'm grateful to all the people in the industry who are out about their gender and sexuality. I'm grateful to everybody who supports and accepts us. It breaks my heart that not everyone can be safe and genuine because some jerks still haven't made it out of the dark ages. We can do so much better than that. I promise that there's a perfect U-shaped place wherever I am, no matter who you are. If you come to my counter, I'll flash my dimples and feed you. If you need to talk, come find me. I see you. You belong. You're not alone.
There is an element of spectacle to being trans. There's rarely a moment when your mind isn't reeling with 1,000 different questions. Do I pass? What even is passing? Why, if I put on my eyeliner and eyeshadow with a face mask on bottom, did I still get misgendered? There's also a bit of spectacle with being a cheesemonger at a busy New York City market. I had become accustomed to knowing my face was in the middle of countless American family vacation photos or snapshots of a night out with the gals while I worked behind the cheese counter. And there were many folks from out of town who would come by and say, "You have cheese from insert name of place here. I'm from there." And then you'd see them swoon as you lovingly spoke about the cheese from their home. Most moments with my customers, I have no idea what they think of me or how I present to the world. I am the expert behind the counter, and they are simply on the search for the creamiest brie or my strongest gorgonzola, or they're looking for the grated Parmigiano, which is over by fresh pasta. The only time I know is when a customer leaves the counter with a "thank you, ma'am," or the unfortunate "thank you for showing me where the Romano is, sir." And when that happens, it stings, but I don't correct the misgendering. It's quicker to just move on to the next customer. Still, there are those moments when I can feel a customer's eyes on me, lingering just a little too long, and I know that they know. I am no longer just their monger. I am visibly trans. Do I know if it made a difference in the sale? No. Do I think about it constantly after? Yes. But when a woman came up to the counter and nervously asked, "Are you like me?" I smiled and said, "Yeah, I think so," because I was almost certain I knew what she was asking. A glowing smile appeared on her face as she said, "It is just so nice to see women like us out and about and living our lives." I made the sale because that's what a good monger does, but for a moment, she was able to see someone like her, just living life. And because of that moment, I'll never dwell too much on being a visibly trans cheesemonger, because visibility matters. I matter.
I've been visibly queer about half my career in cheese retail. While I'm lucky to have not experienced discrimination directly to my face, I know that behind the scenes, that's not the case. At smaller counters, I chose not to come out, whether for working for an owner-led business or for openly witnessing staff in other departments call our general manager a fag under their breath when he'd give them feedback. Larger companies generally have a culture of acceptance, though sometimes it's hard to authenticate real support or that which is forced by HR. Regardless, working for a team that had real HR support and a full understanding of legal ramifications of discrimination was a great relief, especially as I have grown in the field. It's essential that all sizes of cheese business have access to HR consulting resources that can create a sense and true existence of equity amongst its employees.
I identify as a trans woman, but very few people knew this about me until quite recently. I kept my personal life and public life separate because I thought I had to. Thought no one would accept me as a woman, so why try? Life as a man is easier, right? Living with a lie is not just hard, it is not living. Sometimes the lies we tell ourselves grow so big they take over, and one's life becomes the lie. This is what it is like living in the gender you do not identify with, a torture which we perform on ourselves at the benefit of those around us. I spent the majority of my life pretending to be male. I got so good at it, I even began to fool myself, like some kind of self-imposed conversion therapy. The thing with conversion therapy, it doesn't work. It only makes things worse. After years well into adulthood, I somehow managed to come out, first only to myself, then to my partner, to a close friend, a stranger, an acquaintance. Each time it was a little easier. Excitement built as I started hormone therapy, and it was all happening. It was around that time I had stumbled upon the LGBrieTQ group on Facebook and thought I would use it as a stepping stone before coming out more publicly. So one afternoon on a train home from work, I wrote the following. Happy to have been introduced to this group. So I thought I would use this as a fine opportunity to come out in a safe space. I consider myself transgender, but severely closeted. I have been on HRT for the past 8 months and live in an interesting limbo. While I have started to have the most welcome bodily changes in my life, I'm also terrified of many at my work not being supportive of these changes. I purposefully hide my femininity even as it grows stronger every day I come to work. I put my male clothes on like armor and wonder things like if anyone questions why I wear the same pants to work every day. At times, I think of it as easier this way, thinking of my time at work as just playing a character of the opposite sex in some never-ending soap opera. It's a talent I've learned from years of practice, but the visage is cracking, the effort now untenable. I now have a habit of appearing cold and unfriendly to coworkers, unable to cope. My defense is so high, substituting dissociation with feigned masculinity. Then as I get home, the armor comes off and I privately cry on my supportive wife's shoulder. She then tells me the sweetest of lies. We're gonna get you out of there. It'll be okay, you don't need to worry. I love the community that I work in, and I love when it can support us all. But we have a long way to go. I posted it, opened my apartment door, and immediately began to cry. I had just came out to a group of some of the strongest personalities in our industry, and they had only ever known me as a straight male. I did not picture it going well, but it did. The strength I gained that day, reading the comments, the unconditional love, I cannot tell you what it meant to me then, or how much it still does. It still took another 5 to 6 months before I was able to come out publicly, the seeds of which were sown with that post. This group and this industry would accept me for who I am, and I am proud of those who have gotten us to this point. Yet just as it says at the end of the post, I'm reminded we still have a long way to go. Many thanks to the contributors of those testimonials and the commentary that folks were willing to provide from our group. Again, we do recognize that this is a small segment of the representation within our community. Nonetheless, we respect and appreciate your willingness to allow us to tell your stories here today. We do think it's important that beyond hearing from folks, we talk about some of the issues that these testimonials have brought up. So the next part of today's webinar will be a roundtable panel discussion with the 3 panelists you see before you, with myself as moderator. And we have some questions formed that will reflect on what we just heard. So with that said, let's move into our first question. We spoke in the very beginning of this presentation about the importance of the folks who came before us, of the people who didn't have the chance to align so visibly, so publicly, or the folks who did choose to be out publicly and proclaim themselves from the very start of the founding of their business. With that said, today, where do you feel that the LGBrieTQ movement sits within the history of LGBTQ plus persons in our industry as a whole?
Well, certainly the LGBTQ movement, which thank you for calling it a movement. That's an amazing thing to think. I think this is sort of the modern, or I guess the current direction of it. So certainly there's been a really rich legacy of LGBTQ cheese professionals in the United States, although their impact, I think, is frequently minimized outside of more liberal and certainly more artisanal scale niche industry circles. So there are the neo-pastoralist lesbians of the 1970s and 80s, gay owners of specialty shops in the 1990s and early 2000s, and currently several working generations of cheesemongers, again, particularly in larger, more progressive cities who are visibly LGBTQ. However, there has never before been a concerted effort of any kind to build a concrete community with one another, a space or organization that lets us all know that we are not alone. When I created the LGBTQ Facebook group, it was in the wake of anti-LGBTQ legislation and pronouncements from the Trump administration, and also after a conversation with Natalie Matos about the need for marginalized members of the cheese industry to have a network of contact with one another. She was talking about brown and indigenous people of color, black and indigenous people of color, etc. And I was thinking more of the queer community, and we were having a discussion along those lines of how little communication there is within our circles. So currently, from those very small beginnings, we have over 100 members now, which may seem small, but includes farmers, cheesemakers, cheesemongers, store owners, brand representatives, among many, many others. They're members of the earlier generations of LGBTQ plus cheese pioneers and the newest faces in our industry as well. There are people from the most progressive cities in the country and people from states that have voted for conservative presidents since, and I checked this, since Nixon. The L, the G, B, T, Q, and a whole lot of the plus are represented in our Facebook community. So this is where we begin. In spaces where marginalized people have community, advocacy can then follow. And make no mistake, advocacy to ensure our safety as a community is exactly what we intend with this.
And, you know, I'll say too that, you know, Nick, you speak a lot to the start of our group on Facebook. And that is one way to find a specific generation of people. You know, likewise too, it is amazing that we are so lucky to have had pioneers that started in the industry out and open with themselves. So, you know, I have to say how proud I personally am to work for a company that has that legacy. Where, you know, when I wore a tie to my days of interview, the only commentary was like, oh, that color looks really great on you. And not about the gendered clothing choices that I was making within that. You know, so we are lucky to, I think, especially with moments like this and the acceptance of ACS in promoting a panel like this is what will help us to connect those generations and to help us unite the amazingly strong work that those elders have done for us and their strong voices, along with the folks today who are also so willing to put themselves at the forefront of activism and push further growth within our industry. You know, I think with that said too, something else that we see is that we're not alone, right? We have a robust community just on our little Facebook group alone. But many of us find, even through just, you know, chatter within our local communities, that there are so many folks who identify somewhere within the LGBTQ plus spectrum. So what do we think makes cheese such an attractive field to the queer community?
Well, I can only speak for my opinion on this, of course. And I think there are a few different and both agreeing and disagreeing opinions on this. But from my perspective, I'll frame it in the sense that so I'm a huge sports nut. If nobody knows this, an absolute sports nut. And one of my favorite initiatives, particularly in American sport, is the You Can Play project, which focuses on the idea that achievement and participation in sports ought to be based on merit and not sexual orientation. And similarly, the culinary world relies heavily on merit, certainly to a degree. You do not become a good cheesemonger by virtue of your sexual orientation. You become a good cheesemonger by learning everything you can about the cheeses you carry, the historical context for all cheeses, training your palate, discovering how to pair cheeses with other foods, and learning as much as you can about those accompaniments, and understanding how to tell the stories of the cheesemakers and herds you represent, right? You don't become a good dairy farmer by being straight or gay. You become a good farmer by waking up at the wee hours of the morning, learning about what components of your pasture and feed create high quality milk, what practices of herd management are best for your animals and farm, and figuring out the context in which your land management affects the world around you, among many, many other things, but not because you are gay, straight, bi, etc. So the work in our industry relies heavily on merit. And this is one of the reasons I personally found the cheese world so refreshing after I left the theater world, where jobs and accolades existed more on the basis of who knew who, and in that sense also frequently existed on the basis of sexual orientation at times, or sexual preference, friendships, etc. So the opportunity to work in an industry with what appears, at least at the baseline, to be a more level playing field, even if you are extremely visibly queer, is a really, really attractive one. Now, just as in sport, which remains rife with homophobia and transphobia, even with great initiatives like the You Can Play project, we are not yet there in the dairy industry, not even close. We all just listened to all these testimonials, which spelled out, while there are positives, a lot of discrimination and a lot of lack of safety. And it goes well further than that. Just look at how few openly LGBTQ people there are in the industry, in distribution ownership, or in large scale positions of power. Notice how full of LGBT shop owners and cheesemongers New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles seem to be. No matter how those individuals may be treated by their coworkers at the community around them, they're still full of these cheesemongers, but that these names and numbers become exponentially lower in states like Illinois, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and Utah, and even fewer in dairy powerhouses such as Wisconsin and Vermont. Since the 1970s, LGBTQ names have been increasingly associated with American cheesemaking, and in particular, American artisanal cheesemaking. And that may provide a point of entry-level comfort for a substantial number of people new to the industry, particularly once they learn about that history if they didn't know it already. And of course, the more visibly LGBTQ people there are within the industry, the more that fellow family members from every color of the rainbow will be inclined to pursue a career. But we're nowhere near an ideal place when it comes to this, not by a really long shot.
I have some separate notes I would like to get through, well, on the subject of the queer community attraction into working with cheese, but I also wanted to quickly respond to what Nick just said. The LGBTQ plus community is just as diverse in political views and values as they are in sexual identity or gender identity, and don't all share the same views, which we do here, representing a small intersection of that group. I myself disagree with Nick that cheese or the culinary industry is attractive to LGBTQ plus people because the trade is based on merit. Success has much more to do with privilege and luck than anything else. Further, it is more difficult for all minorities beyond just LGBTQ plus individuals to advance based on merit alone due to inherent disadvantages to their minority status. Although within that disagreement, there is this nuance that the size and diversity within our industry and community allows for individuals who do not see eye to eye to still have these conversations, which I think is the root to the cheese industry's attraction to the LGBTQ plus community. The cheese industry has a unique intersectionality with the LGBTQ plus community. While it is true that our queer history as an industry informs us, it is also important to remember the socio-political position we all operate within and the opportunities the modern specialty cheese marketplace provides us, particularly those in the queer community within this industry. Or simply summed up, we came for the community, we stayed for the cheese. To start with an example, one of the keys to our industry is traceability. Everyone's talking about it right now, and we are now in an age where this is both more desired by consumers and possible to track as an industry than ever before. Why is this important to farmers, cheesemakers, distributors, importers, retailers? Why is it important to consumers? Why is it now more important than ever after COVID? We want to know who touched our cheese. Joking aside, it's as simple as that. We all want to know who has touched a product which we consume. Not only is this desired from a safety standpoint, but also from a marketing standpoint, because we care about who benefits from the capital we spend when we get from farm to table, from maker to monger, from cheesemaker to cheese lover. Cheesemongers know better than anyone. Our consumers no longer only wish to know what 3 cheeses to serve with a bottle of $2 chuck. They want to know more than animal breed or animal feed. They want to know if the distributor uses carbon neutral shipping, what publicly beneficial programs the farm creamery sponsors. They want to hear your warehouse guy's story and not just their position on employee hand washing. Which I know sounds like a joke, but I can guarantee that there's some cheesemonger out there who has a story where Big Tony and his journey from Staten Island to Upper East Harlem got them a sale of goat brie. Seriously. LGBTQ plus people, any minority, have long cared about how our communities benefit from the money we spend. And it's obvious now that all American consumers are waking up to this idea. We want to purchase from local shops, spend dollars that will circulate our hometowns and support those we know. As consumers, we have started asking questions about the social impact of mass online sales, but also who really owns the local cheese shop and what are we supporting when we shop there or when we shop at that regional mega mart, vice versa. The point is, where does our money go? This isn't all doom and gloom for our industry. It's an opportunity. There are so many queer voices in this industry, and consumers are interested in our stories. I'm not just talking about putting a pride flag up or getting some corporate float during a pride parade. I'm talking about how can we better include each other through the food we share. Our industry spans rural areas, inner cities, every race, religion, political position. While we may not be all the same, we at our best make peace over politics, and at the worst, at least overlook politics to do the business we do. That is the attraction. Also, the possible downfall of our industry in regards to minority involvement, LGBTQ plus or otherwise. Eating is a political act, and the sharing of cheese is a better example than any and it allows us to tell the stories to each other, of each other. Queer persons are already a link to these food chains and are one of the strongest in it. Like it or not, we are here and we have been for years, and we deserve to have our stories told just like anyone else. If we are not part of that story, we face erasure. That is what I'm talking about. Erasure of our history, past and present. The queer experience is part of the stories we share when we share cheese with each other. This industry was built on sharing. The sharing of stories, the sharing of tables, the sharing of cheese. So when you share cheese, when you go to work, you need to think about your privileges. Even as a queer person, think about who brought you there. Who is this industry built on? It's built on queer voices, queer power. Remember them. That is why we care. Why we love this industry, because here we have that privilege too. I'll get off the soapbox now.
Well, Eris, you just took us to school and to history class and civics and social studies at the same time, and thank you for that. You know, I think within that too, you know, there is further education overall that needs to be done within this industry. So with that said, what trainings do we think need to be prioritized for organizations who hear this passionate call, who wonder how they can get involved? What's the need to prioritize trainings for organizations who want to take action?
I'll get back up on my soapbox for this one. When I was just talking about voices, privileges, I'm mainly talking about visibility, and that's what we need to prioritize here. Speaking from my own experiences as a visible trans lesbian who came out much later in life, currently this means a focus on trans rights and visibility as much as all parts of the LGBTQ community. That means pronoun training, manager and administration awareness, expanding spaces through app. I'll get more into it. For context,
Hey guys, this is Heather. I think we might be losing Eris a little bit.
Just a heads up, folks, Eris right now is located in New York City, where is a hurricane actively disrupting a bit of service. So Eris, I'm sorry, I think you now have directly connected to us. We lost you at the very beginning there of your answer. We apologize. But my dear, if you would continue for us.
Oh my Lord. Where'd we leave off, Caitlin?
So I'll pose the question again, which is, what trainings do we think need to be prioritized for organizations who want to take action?
Right. So, visibility. Speaking from my own experiences, I'm a trans lesbian who came out much later in life. We need to focus on trans rights and visibility therein. Pronoun training, manager administration awareness, expanding of safe spaces through advocacy itself. For context, I spent the majority of my career being perceived as a heterosexual cisgendered male. This meaning born into the gender identity one prefers and preferring the opposite gender to one own sexually as a sexual preference. Point is, I began to become acutely aware during those times of what was lacking in the workplace and, well, what was working. While I was drawn to cheese because of its strong feminist and LGBTQ+ history, I quickly found it was also a great place to hide. Living as a male allowed me to be exposed to a number of the privileges which come from being a white heteronormative cis male. I can say without a doubt, I would not be as successful in my career if I had started out as a visible trans woman like I am today. When I was male, I witnessed discrimination and harassment of trans persons throughout my life, both in and out of work. Many of these instances are outright casual and remain unpunished or just simply overlooked. And it's always part of the culture. They stem from the ignorance and fear of transgender persons, or really just simple toxic misogyny. It's the creation of boys' clubs, gendered roles in the workplace, jokes. To make matters worse, many of these LGBTQ+ people, they tolerate these behaviors to avoid becoming victims themselves, particularly in regards to LGBT persons who are just observing trans people who they themselves might not identify as trans. The point is, trans people, they become trapped in this culture already, and they feel a need to conform to it. Hell, I've always avoided participation in this behavior, but there have been times I avoided reporting instances out of fear for my own safety and well-being. After knowing many of my direct supervisors, and they had made trans exclusionary jokes themselves to me, or just never seeing any change of behaviors in the workplace, this gave me direct fear of my own safety. It regularly broke apart my sense of self, particularly after I started taking hormones and had to hide physical changes as well. These forms of harassment and discrimination, they can be mind-breaking to those in the trans community and are what drive the high trans rates of suicide. Unlike some of the better known identities within the LGBTQ+ spectrum, being transgender or even just gender questioning can be one of the loneliness due to the lack of visibility and community. Both in and out of the closet, many trans persons never wish to be identified, and frankly, never should be if they prefer such. Even though I wish there were so many more visible trans people in this community, I understand why there is not. This is what it means when you're visibly trans versus living stealth or closeted. A closeted person is living in the gender identity which they do not identify with. A visible trans person lives in their preferred gender identity, but may not always outwardly be identified by others as that identity. Whereas those living stealth, they live in their preferred gender and are almost undetectable to anyone, even other trans persons. Why is this important to understand this silly little lesson? Many of you already work with trans persons and have no idea. Even if you yourself are trans, sure, it may be easy to like clock me with my giant shoulders and sexy baritone voice, but many organizations or employers are never aware that there are trans persons working alongside them right now who identify as transgender. Your own boss may be transgender. The person you're selling something to. Remember Big Tony in the warehouse? Yeah, we sneaky like that. Yet, this also makes advocacy for this group so much more important, as transgender persons frequently have no one obvious to turn to if things get bad. I have been amazed since coming out at the number of different trans persons in our industry who have approached me privately, many of whom are living stealth in their preferred gender or still closeted. And even myself, I had no idea they were transgender. I've met retail workers, shop owners, distributors, truck drivers, salespersons, farmers, all trans. Yet they do not show their trans identity to this industry and prefer to keep it that way because they're afraid of what negativity it could bring upon them. Even in an industry which is frankly very, very, very accepting. But we have seen that it is far from accepting enough. So how do we make this better? What steps? First, we need to listen. Inclusivity training is key. Training of queer and transgender rights, visibility to the leads of our industry, the business owners, the administrators, managers takes priority here. They are the ones who dictate the culture of these workplaces most of all, and they are the ones who can make the biggest and simplest changes. Some other just kind of little silly things I'll throw in here. Marketing people, let's talk about just some fun little marketing things. Namely that of looking at data and these demographics, and let's make a pledge maybe to not market just based on the demographic of sex. At least we can make an effort to, I don't know, avoid hers and his gift boxes, or I don't know. Okay, wait, no, please, as an industry, can we just stop the perception that only middle-aged women enjoy yogurt? Really, we are the dairy industry. We are the only people who can change that. Anyways, employers, large and small, seek outside advocates whenever you make the jump to explore inclusivity training or are handling a delicate situation with an LGBTQ plus employee or customer. Resist calling your lawyer. Call an outside advocate instead. Advocates are frequently able to diffuse LGBTQ plus related issues in the workplace without lawyers ever needing to get involved. It's done frequently anonymously and is completely confidential. Plus, they are a hell of a lot cheaper, sometimes free versus any legal counsel. It is important to have these advocates come from the outside of an organization as well, as they are the only ones who can remain a positive neutral force by being not affiliated with either party. Even more than any darn HR department. In the end, it's just, I want to push the point here. Visibility and advocacy is what allows for inclusivity. We create safe spaces this way by understanding who each other are and the ways we can help each other. So, well, I'm gonna get off the soapbox again. I've been talking for hours, I feel like, but think about it.
I'm hoping for everyone who watches the future recording that you pause, you go back, and you watch Eris again and digest all of those amazing points that she just made for us. Eris, you brought up the idea of spaces. And, you know, safe spaces kind of comes off as like a keyword or like a catchphrase these days, you know, similar to privilege, where it can kind of sometimes feel loaded or owned by certain people and confusing by other people. So I'm curious for the panel, what do you think constitutes safe space in the workplace? And how do we go about creating that?
Yeah, so I'd like to say some stuff about that. First of all, I think it's important to note that if you have employees at your company that are out as members of the LGBTQ plus community, never underestimate the impact of having a safe individual conversation with those people and asking them if you are serving them well and how you can serve them better. When I say this, I don't mean to put the onus on those individuals and ask them to do that work, but to find out what isn't working and do your best to improve upon anything that needs it. If you don't know of any out employees in your workplace, don't assume that they don't exist. And if your company truly doesn't have any LGBTQ employees, first ask yourself why that is. And second, consider the positive impact of creating a more inclusive company and how it may help you diversify your staff in the future. Here are a few things that I've been thinking about that can help create a safe workplace for queer individuals. One thing that I've heard from a number of people who have worked in production is that despite the fact that many of the American artisan cheese industry's founders are women and queer women, outside of pretty small scale production, most cheese production labor is done by cis men, and the equipment and processes are well adapted to their needs and pretty much no one else's. There are, of course, exceptions. There are, in fact, cheese makers where the equipment is designed for a more petite, usually female body type, because that's how it's always been there, and so it's harder for maybe a tall male-bodied person to work in that environment. But for the most part, the default setting is geared towards cis men, and this default setting is really difficult for anyone whose body doesn't adhere to that established standard to succeed in. And in those cases, it's almost always expected that the individual who is struggling should be the one to adapt to the norm or figure it out, or the company might express that this job isn't a good fit for someone who's struggling to fit those standards, rather than the company taking a step back and investing in making changes or adding equipment or changing that process that would benefit most likely not just the person who's struggling, but everyone else who works there. And also making those changes would open up opportunities for other folks who might otherwise be discouraged from pursuing this kind of work. I understand that cheese making equipment is incredibly expensive, and people who already have that in place, it's really hard financially to make those changes. But what if the companies producing that equipment took this into consideration? And what if you were starting a new creamery, when you're building out that facility, you were to consider all of these levels of accessibility? I think that could be really important. Anyone who's renovating or buying new equipment right now, which right now probably not, but in the near future. Something else, other small things that companies can do include making room for LGBTQ plus needs like gender neutral restrooms and changing areas, making sure that if your company has a dress code, that those dress codes aren't forcing people to present within binary gender norms, making sure that you're using LGBTQ plus inclusive language when you're talking about families and couples, etc. And under that kind of umbrella, talking about families, make sure that if your company offers benefits, health insurance, that those insurance benefits can be extended to non-heteronormative relationships and couplings and family setups. And kind of on the other side of using inclusive language is reinforcing gender neutral language, especially in groups, saying all of the people who work here versus the men and women who work here, or saying hello everybody instead of hello ladies and gentlemen. it's almost never necessary to gender anyone at any time. So that comes with practice. You'll usually save a few words too by using gender neutral words. I also think, especially as a non-binary person, normalizing that pronoun ask by having employees in general include pronouns on things like name tags, during introductions and meetings, and their email signatures. I feel the need to specify my gender in an e-signature, but it's much more comfortable when I'm not the only one at my company doing it. So that kind of support is excellent. Creating a culture of allyship where non-queer workers in your company feel compelled to advocate for LGBTQ+ members when necessary, making sure that it's not always on the person who is impacted most by negative behavior or language to bring that to HR's attention. Knowing that other people are also bringing that up is really important, and usually a company will make more progress when they hear more people bringing this up. Look closely at your leadership and aim for a management team that includes LGBTQ+ voices, and that also means including LGBTQ+ members in decision-making processes at your company, and making sure that any decisions that are made behind closed doors work for all LGBTQ members of the company. Celebrating your LGBTQ workers and their contributions is also key. And finally, making sure that your employee handbook includes a section that explicitly outlines unacceptable language and behavior which negatively impacts LGBTQ+ members at your company. Provide a grievance policy which feels safe for LGBTQ+ members to navigate. Make sure that whoever is in your HR department, that those people feel safe for your LGBTQ members to approach. And if for whatever reason you get feedback that that isn't the case, do everything that you can to change that, and allow for deviations from the standard grievance policy if your LGBTQ+ members need to talk to someone else who might not be on a particular management team. And just make sure that there's plenty of people in your company that LGBTQ+ members can rely on for support and advocacy. And finally, if any grievances are made, making sure that actions are taken according to your LGBTQ+ members' wishes when policies are not followed by other employees is key. Making sure that you're doing right by those members is super important. And the thing is that a lot of this also applies to other minorities and marginalized groups within our community. You can apply a lot of this approach to dealing with diversity in general at your company.
So first, I hope that everybody again pauses their screen right now, goes back and takes action with some of the many things that Lilith listed off there. If nothing else, go change your email signature right now, or ask the person who controls that at your company if that's something that you can do company-wide. And then work backwards from there on all of the rest of that great list. When we opened this presentation, we mentioned that we would hear some first-person testimonials, hearing directly in the voices of people impacted in our community. We reflected on that together as a panel, but we also promised that there would be a call to action. We all need to do something here. You've heard us emote extensively on our positions within the cheese community, but we know again that we only represent very few of those people in a very specific place, in a very specific generational location, and that is not okay either. So we need more. So my question for the panel now is, how can folks listening today get involved?
So we've created a direct way to get involved, which is that we have created a survey, which there will be a link for after we conclude this session on the closing slides here. And this survey is not just about gathering data. There are some questions about you know, how you might identify and your personal experiences within the cheese industry, what you think has we've been doing well and what we need to do better with our industry for our community. But there's also a chance for you to say, yes, I really want to help here, whether you are a member of the queer community, whether you identify as an ally, or whether you haven't previously identified as an ally and want to know what you can do, whether as an individual or as someone who runs a company or is part of a bigger company. We are hoping to use this survey not just to gather data, but to establish an action-oriented coalition of people who might not have known about us before, whether you're someone who isn't on Facebook and didn't hear about us until now, or for whatever other reason. This survey is your in to kind of be part of a group of people who really wants to make progress, change, visible change, starting now and ongoing.
So for those of you who stopped listening when we said the word survey, who were like, oh, I just listened through all of this and all I get is a survey. The survey is just our call to action. It's our chance to align both members of our community and our allies. Because remember, our Facebook group is specifically just for folks within the LGBTQ plus community. So we hope that if you do want to join us there in that virtual space, that you will email us at lgbrietq@gmail.com. But the call to action for every single person on this webinar today is to jump on that survey so that we now can hear you. You've heard us for quite a long time at this point. And like we said, we are just a few voices within this community, but we want to use ours to align ourselves together and further the cause for our LGBTQ plus persons in the world of cheese in every single facet of the industry. So we need you to report back to us. Let us know that you are interested in this form of advocacy. Let us know too that you know, maybe this is something that ACS needs to address every single year, maybe in the form of an ongoing panel or committee, or other way to promote further advocacy for what clearly is a very large portion, an important portion of our body of members and non-members, and the people that we affect with our work every day. So with that said, on behalf of our panel, first I need to thank our panel so much today for their willingness to share their own experiences, to share those of our LGBTQ and LGBTQ plus community. We also have to thank ACS, and in particular, their commitment to ensuring that this presentation happened regardless of what was happening in the world around us. Thank you again for your support of us, and also to Dairy Connection for your sponsorship, allowing us to have this space free of charge and to allow it access to everyone. Thank you again to all who joined us today. Thank you again to all of our queer elders who made this possible as well. We respect and appreciate you and continue to look to you for further guidance. And thank you everyone today for joining in.
Excellent. Thank you so much, guys. Again, this is Heather over here at ACS. I'm going to just again, thank you everyone for attending. We went a little bit over, but it was such a good conversation. I hope we all really took some great stuff away. I'm just going to go into my little part right here. And so thank you again for attending. Thank you again, Dairy Connection, for their sponsorship of this webinar series. Thank you again to our panelists, Eris, Caitlin, Lilith, and Nick, for this great conversation. And I hope just the first of many that we're going to have. And just again, our quick showing of the description so people can look at it later. And again, this was the LGBrieTQ, our cheese industry guide to inclusivity of the LGBTQ plus community. Here's our survey link right here, guys. We're also going to have it sent out in emails with also our regular ACS feedback survey, and also this email right here. So if you have any questions that you want to share with our panelists, you can send it to LGBrieTQ@gmail.com. And we have the question, guys, is there a deadline on the survey for those that are watching later? Or is it going to close out at any particular time?
We'll leave this open for at least a month. Considering that we have, about a month plus to submit for next year's ACS panel. Hopefully we will have a great response and feedback by then so that we can present our results next year, if not sooner, to our broader community and start activating all of you on the behalf of our LGBTQ plus persons.
Excellent. So today is August 4th for this recording. So 30 days from now is when that survey is going to close. And also, please check out our other virtual programming. You can go to cheesesociety.org to see our previously recorded panels and also see what's coming up in our webinar series. And again, thank you for our sponsors and their continuing support of our webinar series here at ACS. Again, this is Heather, our education coordinator here at ACS and the head of education. Thank you for coming out today. It's great to be queer and proud in today. Have a great day. Bye.